All right, we're now live at the Polar Bear broadcast from WeirdWorks. Hello, and welcome to our sort of inaugural pilot. Oh, I'm hearing myself, though.
Here's Dave. Dave's joined the video call.
Dave's not here, man.
Hey, Dave.
Let's see here. I got a new camera, and I was actually trying to use Google Hangouts on air last night for my D&D game, and Google said, "We don't like your camera." And I was like, "It's only one of the most popular cameras ever." So I'm going to plug it back in and see what Google Hangouts has to say about it 24 hours later. Let's see here.
I just figured out that I was streaming this show on YouTube, and so I was hearing an echo that was crazy. That was like what do they call that? Voice jamming. Anyway.
Nice.
Hey.
Look at you and your hair. You have hair. I don't have hair, so I'm always jealous of people with crazy hair. You just look like you rolled out of bed.
Yeah, I work from home, so it's all like one big nightmare.
One big PJ fest.
That's right. I mean, not really kidding. We've got 2 viewers. Hello out there. I'm gonna look in the chat, and you could ID yourself if you want in the live chat. Hello.
All right.
WeirdWorkers. You don't have to chat. Anyway, I assume Ed is out there, and I can't remember who else was gonna watch live. But I wanted to start out first. This is about social media and how to use it to promote creative work. And we're going to get informal here. And I want to say that we're not pitching ourselves as any experts here. We're all just people who have had some experience with social media, I think. And more than anything, I think we're going to be asking each other questions about what has worked. I am getting a chat from Bret. Bret is having a Firefox issue, so we're standing by for him. But I thought we'd start by going around and just thinking about the archive ahead. Let's introduce ourselves, even though it seems like most people would know us at this point. What we do in this community, as far as what kind of work we have done out there, and then I've got some other prompts. So Dave, could you talk a little bit about kind of who you are, introduce yourself? And
I could talk about myself all day. Yeah, totally.
Sweet.
Yeah, Dave Sokolowski, been role-playing since 1980, I think. Lately have been working on a few different Call of Cthulhu projects, self-published via Kickstarter, He Who Laughs Last for Cthulhu Dark and Sunspots for Call of Cthulhu 7th edition, contributor to the Masks of Nyarlathotep companion, and interested in the whole self-publishing thing, social media, taking a swing at it. People tell me that I've been successful. I don't feel like I have a grasp on what makes me successful aside from a willingness to endure a lot of craziness and risk. So
okay, well, that's a pretty good statement of approach there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Anthony, and you go by Keeper Ant, I know, on some forums, so people might recognize you by that moniker. You want to talk a little bit about what your social media and horror gaming sort of resume is like?
They're very separate, actually. My horror gaming resume is much shorter than Dave's. I've been gaming since 78, 79. My go-to box set for Call of Cthulhu and other horror games are usually very early ones. I've done a bit of writing. I've got a few short stories that have been published in things like Proto Dimension magazine, and I've done a bit of scenario writing, some of which are in the pipeline. I've managed to sell some things, and I've managed to have some things published. I just have not yet managed to have the two happen simultaneously, which is a curious place to be. With regards to the other aspects, the social media aspect, I ran my own business as a salsa teacher, and social media, particularly Facebook, which was what I think the kids were up to at the time, was the big way of getting out and really reaching as many people as possible. In the end, far more than having a static website and things. But I've also used other formats like Twitter and things like that as well.
Great. Welcome, Bret.
Hello. Can you hear me?
You can be heard.
Excellent.
That's good. So we were just going around and doing introductions in case people don't at least know our faces or know us at all. And could you talk a little bit about who you are and what kinds of platforms and social media experience you have?
Sure. My name is Bret Kramer. I'm the editor and really sole employee of Sentinel Hill Press, an LLC, with a sole proprietorship, which is me. And that is a Call of Cthulhu licensee. And I published the Arkham Gazette and hopefully branch out soon. Have a Kickstarter that just wrapped up recently enough that I can still say it wrapped up recently for a standalone scenario called The Dare by Kevin Ross, a sort of reissue of an old and generally forgotten scenario, sort of Halloween themed, and hope to branch out to some other products soon. I've actually found Facebook to be really frustrating to use. So I'm mostly on Twitter. I have my own standalone website. Trying to remember where the camera is so I can look into it. And Google Plus I still use since gamers seem to be there if no one else is. However long that stays up, and trying to think of anything else. That's about it. I mean, obviously I use websites, especially I'm a moderator at yogsothoth.com. I try not to abuse my position there. So
right.
Since I don't want to be fired as a moderator.
Right. And I podcast as Keeper Chad. I write as Charles Gerard, and I think people at WeirdWorks know that I have been a catalyst in trying to get the WeirdWorks group together. And so I'm really glad to try this out as a forum for talking to each other, and to have maybe some archives eventually available to actually help people. So if you're here and you're looking for advice on social media, we are going to do our best. We're sort of all trying to figure it out together. I find, so I do use social media for professionally, but I am also, I go to it sort of kicking and screaming as well. So I find social media to be obnoxious often, and also a fascinating, amazing toy of interaction, and I get a lot out of it, and I'm often surprised what I get out of it. So to use it to help on the creator side and promote stuff is a fascinating sort of mini game to me. How to make that work.
That's an interesting way to look at it. I haven't quite looked at it that way.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the win conditions would be, but they're.
I think it's kind of like when Final Fantasy, when I raced to finish the game at like level 35 because I didn't want to play anymore, and my wife stayed till she could get like Knights of the Round or whatever in Final Fantasy 7, and I think I'm more that way than anything else. So no more chocobo racing for me, thank you.
Right. I think that's the thing that I wanted to start with as a notion, is that everybody's got their own social media frequency or their own sort of communications frequency, and it's multidimensional and sort of singularity, bizarre shaped if you were to map it. So, some people, like, I can only reach my dad by text on phone. I can reach my mother most quickly by chatting on Facebook. I have friends who I can immediately contact on Google Plus Chat or Google Chat, and so it's like every user has their own habits and comfort zones, and as creators we also have our own habits and comfort zones. And I think the trick, or the mini game, is to match our habits with the consumers, or sort of hate to reduce people to consumers, but
End user.
I mean, I am talking about clicks and buying, So.
Yeah, I think there's also an element of it where, just from a meta standpoint, like, and I was kind of chatting with Bret a little bit on this earlier, and I think Chad, you and I have toyed with it. Just like, what's your goal, right? Like, there's a big difference between, because for one, as a Kickstarter, I followed Richard Bliss's podcast, which is called I'm going to forget. Anyway, he's got a big
Bliss.
Follow Your Bliss. It's something like that. It's, funding the dream on Kickstarter. And I actually know Richard personally. He lives in San Jose, but he built a very large community around board gaming Kickstarters, right? And he became friends with Aldo Gaiazzi, who, I don't know if you know him, but he's a distributor. He's name checked in all of the Pelgrane stuff. And Jamie Stegmaier, who's had some success with Stonemaier Games, Scythe, Charterstone, those things. So just in the board game community, between Jamie Stegmaier and Richard Bliss, you can find a lot about how they've documented, whether through podcast or website, how to navigate social media for a successful sort of board game business. Now, one of their first things that I have learned was, well, what's your goal here, right? Is it to sell, board games? Let's pull it into role-playing games. Is it to sell more books? I think that we, as the stepchildren of the industry, role-playing games, in the Cthulhu role-playing games, where a subgenre of a subgenre or a subclick of a subclick, like, it's really hard to look at making a living as a role-playing game writer. So what is your goal at whatever it is that you're doing, whether you're writing a particular article, whether, let's say I was writing something for Bret's publication, or let's say Bret is putting out his next Kickstarter of a Kevin Ross, like, what's that goal? Is it to make more money? Is it to build a brand perhaps around your name? What is it? And I think that's going to inform sort of your relationship, to go back to your point, Chad, of your end users, right? The people who you want to go, oh, cool, Chad's got a new scenario, or yay, Sentinel Hill Press is releasing Arkham Gazette 4, or whatever it is, right? Whatever it is your goal is, I think has to inform the sort of your tenor on social media.
Yeah,
that's my proposal.
Yep. I mean, I certainly agree with that, because you can sink a lot of time into not knowing what you're doing and just being on social media. It's a distracting environment.
Huge, right? You can sink all the time into into being on social media with little reward, if any.
I think one thing that was very interesting that you mentioned, Chad, was knowing which particular brand of social media is going to be the one that you need to be looking at. Google Plus, you mentioned, is seems to be very big at the moment. I think it was you that mentioned it. They're very big at the moment with gamers, still popular. But one thing I discovered was that certain demographics within the people that I was trying to reach with my business didn't use other forms of media. There was no point in me going into some of the more modern, slightly more niche areas, whereas something like Facebook definitely did help, because it hit so many more of the demographic that I was going for.
What did you use and then drop because it wasn't working?
I looked at some of the more the modern ones, the ones that hadn't been around anywhere near as long. Twitter, particularly for dancing scene, it didn't seem to work at all. People weren't interested. They wanted to see colorful flyers and pictures, and Facebook is much better at doing that than Twitter is. But yeah, some of the more modern, because I'm an old guy, so some of the more modern ones that the kids are using, it was the wrong market. Those weren't the people I was trying to reach. So there was no point in me throwing the stuff into there and putting the time into there, because, like David said, you only have a certain amount of time, and you've got to use it and to hit the places that you're going to get the best response from.
Yeah.
I think the challenge. Sorry, you can go.
Go ahead.
I think the challenge for us, especially in this sort of niche of a niche, is that we don't have a marketing firm that can tell us.
That's true.
35% of your users are also coffee drinkers. So you need to advertise at Starbucks, which would be a terrible waste of time, because, my ad budget is how much free time can I squeeze out and put out, things that will potentially attract attention on useful websites and other platforms. So it is a bit, it's not a crapshoot in this purest sense, but I'm not going to go on to just random Reddit forums and start posting everywhere, because it'll be a complete waste of time. If there's like Yog Sothoth is good for Call of Cthulhu players, and there's other boards that are forums or other media or methods to get out there that you just have to have at least a vague inkling that it'll be somewhat productive. I think the other thing is just consistency. If you are somewhere and you do add content, you tend to at least, if there's someone to be interested in what you're doing, they'll probably show up eventually, although it can be a slow build sometimes.
Yeah, the message that I've heard that makes the most sense is, especially around crowdsourcing, but I think it has to do with any self-publishing, anything like this, is, and just to answer your point, where is your crowd, right? You have to go find your crowd. For the longest time, I felt like Yog Sothoth was really the only place for the sort of Cthulhu gaming community. I think in the last 5 years, it's really branched out into a number of other places. But that's where I felt like I had logged my time, and I mean, obviously, Bret, you've been there for forever. Logging your time with your community, growing your roots, sort of like organically with the community, goes a long way toward being part of that tribe. I've found now that the Call of Cthulhu Facebook community actually seems to be fairly energetic and alive, and I have actually sort of I haven't turned my back, but I have left Yog Sothoth a little bit, just because I'm not so much into forums, but I also waste so much time on Facebook. It's tough to tell. I have to go and do that same thing with myself of like, what's my goal for spending time on any sort of social media? Because otherwise I'll burn hours and I'll grow resentful. So. But yeah, I think that going to find your crowd, and just like you said, like, it's not about, hey, build it and they will come. It's, you need to go to where they are and then build it. And then they'll say, hey, we know you, you're cool. Oh, you're here and you've built it,
Yeah, I forgot to mention sort of where I am in the creation process, and I'm totally a neophyte. I've got one thing published, kind of. I've got a couple other things in the works, but
I've got an article in the Arkham Gazette. Come on.
Indeed, that's absolutely right. Yeah.
Inner circle now.
That's right.
There aren't that many people who submitted articles, so you're in a rare.
You hear that, weird workers?
I'm open to submissions, people.
Oh, what was I gonna say?
You're talking about your own position and what you're doing and getting out there. Are you going to talk about
well, go back to your Chinwag document.
Oh, we could do that, yeah. And I'm sure it's going to hit me like lightning what I was in the middle of. But we've got a bunch of questions, and we might as well refer to them. I think some of them it's stuff that I was wanting to address anyway. We've already talked a little bit about where to put your energy and focus, but maybe we can be more specific and, you know, go from sort of the philosophical overview to nuts and bolts on what social media platforms are working very well for you in what you're trying to do right now. So I heard Dave, you were using Facebook more and more.
Well, yeah. So I haven't cracked the code. I think that's part of why we're sitting here right now, is because I am interested in understanding what I should be doing. I haven't cracked the code. I have like 900 followers on Twitter, most of which they're not even bots, right? But they're just, share, and I've just sort of collected them. I think that organically there's probably like 20, and that includes Bret. But I like, and I have a Facebook author page, and maybe I've got 150, sort of like publisher author page. I've got 150 people there. I've got a blog that I can't seem to write enough to. And time for me is my greatest currency. So what I'm thinking about doing is trying to strip it down and really, really simple, because you can hook stuff up together, right? Like I can hook up my Facebook page to Twitter so that they're cross-pollinating, which is great. And then my blog and those, and I'm looking at, I was just thinking about this leading up to this. I'm thinking about Ken Hite. And he's obviously got his own. He's successful in his own right, and he's got his own thing. So he's not trying to build a brand. He's just out there working. But he basically has two things, right? He's got his Facebook. I've actually interacted with him. I talk with him like, why do you only have your own personal Facebook and not a publisher page, or sort of like a writer page? And he's like, I can't imagine having to manage two at the same time. That makes sense. So, close one down to the public and make one, just have one public. And then he's got his podcast, right? His Any award-winning podcast with Robin Laws. And that's it. And then he writes. And I'm thinking that from a goal, from the standpoint of streamlining, I think that makes sense, where you've got sort of like one small thing where you are writing, whether it's Twitter or Facebook or Google, and you're out there and you do one thing, and then you've got something else like a blog or a podcast, and then you've got your work. And that seems to make sense to me. So that's sort of where I am I still haven't cracked the code on it, but that seems to be, looking toward a working writer who I admire, who at least has some social media presence and is winning awards with it, by the way. So that's sort of my take on it right now.
Yeah. Bret, what about you?
Yes.
As far as what's working for you? It sounds like Twitter is your main.
Well, I mean, I sort of have, I think my goal is to avoid just retweeting things all the time of other people. But they try to at least have like a daily post of some sort on Twitter, just because it's much easier than to construct I've also got basically a WordPress page that I use some of my Kickstarter funds to, make to get rid of the ads, because I've always dreamed of doing that. So I took $99 and did that. So I used to update that a lot more frequently, but having kids has had a pretty time intensive. Strangely, they need attention and affection, which, it's generally I'm pretty happy to provide. But once in a while, it's like, Daddy just wants to finish proofreading, honey. That's not gonna work. Especially my youngest seems to have an inerring sixth sense when I open the keyboard of the laptop up. Like I can be in the other room and he could be dead asleep, and then suddenly, as soon as I touch the keyboard, which is frustrating. And I just, it's one of those things where you sort of have to recognize what the appropriate priorities are. So, reposting something on Twitter, just posting like a link to a book or something I found that's interesting is a lot easier than trying to write, update 3 to New England's Alchemists or something. One way I've tried to economize is to try to find posts to the blog that I can repurpose eventually as articles, either some, or at least the research can be useful somewhere. So I have a couple, sort of abiding interests that I tend to come back to. like gravestones and graveyards. That's that's sort of a long-term project I've been working on. It's involved a lot of research there. So I might find like a strange story and or unusual anecdote which I can sort of turn into a post about an unusual gravestone, say, or a gravestone carver who I find is like a book about them. I can say, hey, there's this guy, he's there. I can sort of, and I can depending on how much information there is and how interesting I think it is to the potential audience, I can sort of prioritize. Do I want to save it for a Facebook? Do I want to save it for a blog post, which I've not done tons of lately, just because they are so time intensive, especially compared to trying to get articles done or rereading or proofreading or trying to like the dare. I'm trying to like make this a very user friendly scenario. So I've been very closely reading it, trying to imagine myself being someone who's never played the game before, which is it's made things go a lot more slowly than I imagined. Whereas I like my one easy crutch post a week generally on the Twitter is there's a New England folklore blog, and that's easy. The guy posts an interesting article once a week. I say, here's the link. I don't think he's got a Facebook page or Twitter. I don't think he's on Twitter. So, it's not like I'm reduplicating his efforts. I always make sure to cite whoever I'm mentioning if I'm reposting something. I sort of hate that when you're just sort of regurgitating other people's content. That just personally ticks me off. And a lot of it's just me digging around on archive.org is a great place because it's digitizing so many like 18th and 19th century documents. And New England history is an easier thing to find than say, medieval Spain or, it's a lot more accessible. And, I try to find things that are, sort of germane to gaming. Occasionally news stories pop up that seem like an obvious scenario hook. Today it was some BBC headline about man attempts to set spider on fire and it burns his whole apartment down. I mean, it's an insane headline. Or, backpackers in Australia inadvertently get the mail for someone else, open it up, think it's cocaine, and they all take it and discover it's something much worse. That seems like a pretty obvious scenario hook. So I'll post those too. Those are pretty low effort, but at least I try to add something to them, so it's not just regurgitation that you could get somewhere else. I try to add value. Even if it's just a simple, like when I was going through, Archive has a bunch of like travel guides from the 30s or 20s to like Western Massachusetts, and I took the pictures out of those. Just they have the picture scanned. I just posted those with a link to the page, so I identified where the source was, and then in the end, I made like a sort of photo journal of them. So there's at least a little bit of added content.
Yeah, I get the sense when as a consumer watching your Google Plus, that I'm sort of seeing building blocks of the research that you're doing otherwise. So
yes, I try to not waste my time.
Right.
Because I really got, so much.
I feel that way watching Shane Ivey's feed and Ken Height's feed. Like you can sort of see them mulling ideas when they come across weird news and share them or whatever it is. I feel like I'm seeing the building blocks, which as on the consumer side is really fascinating.
Well, one thing I've tried to fight the urge to is like hold on to something that's really cool and save it for later. Because, obviously there's some things I want to conserve, but I used to be convinced like I've got to save these 17 neat things and save them for a blog post later on. And if I post them individually, not a lot of people are going to go ahead, reconstruct them all into the same idea I had and say, aha, this thing you found about, Pope Night, which was the North America, the New England version of Guy Fawkes Day. I had a couple of those. I posted them up earlier. Then I eventually assembled it all into a longer post, and then I found even more information later on, so I had to go back and update it. But I had to, it's a tendency. I was afraid to like post something, because I didn't want to squander it now. And usually, there's very little it's going to be a dead giveaway. And I do have one other platform I use, which is Patreon. So if there's something I'm really sort of loath to hand out because it's such a clever, great thing I found, I post it there. Because the entrance there is at least you have to pay $1 or something or whatever it is. And it's relatively unlikely someone's going to, dig through all that and say, haha, I found your really funny reference to this obscure gravestone carver who made people with spaghetti hair. Which is for the Felton carver of New Salem. So
awesome. Yeah, I found that with the podcast that I've had to get over trying to sort of keep ideas that I am attached to, that I have. I gotta show up on that thing and talk, and so I've just realized that just let it go, and if somebody else runs with the idea, I mean, they're not that precious, ideas.
Yeah. Everything's tertiary these days. Like, it's way better. We're in this place where we get so much information and so many ideas and so much data, just sort of like fire hosed all the time. Yeah, I want to go, Brett. I just want to comment on a thing I think one of the things you said that was key is the adding value. I think that, especially as you're trying to build a brand, I was trying to outline it maybe in the Slack channel the other day, like, and maybe I should just put together a slide, because that's what I do professionally, so I know how to do it. But it's like this idea of, like, you're going to have to give some stuff away for free. You're going to have to give some of your cool ideas away for free. And social media is where you do that. So if you're doing it in Twitter, or you're doing it in Google Plus, or you're doing it in Facebook, or let's say you're even, on Instagram or something like that, you're giving some idea away. You're writing something up, or you're creating something small and you're giving that away. That's why people will follow you. There's value. Or you're writing something on your blog, right? And you've got something cool that you're giving away for free that's small. And then you go out and then you engage in that social media as a participant in conversation. So now you're out on Google Plus or Facebook or Twitter, and you're out there and you're talking with people and you're commenting on their questions, and they're like, gosh, Brett is so cool. I wonder what else he does. And then they go and they find, oh, he's got this Twitter feed and he's got this other thing that he does, and he's giving that stuff away for free. So that's where your followers come from. And then occasionally, like 1 out of 10, 9 times you're giving away something for free. And then on that 10th time, you're like, hey, I've got the Arkham Gazette #4 Kickstarter
Someday.
That's coming up, and those people are like, oh, that's great, now I'm going to buy. And then from there you go and you sort of start that circle again, and there's this weird sort of feedback loop. That's the ideal, I believe. But that adding value, I think, is really, really key. I wanted to recommend, I need to write a blog post on this, so I need to add value on this. This book is huge, Book Life by Jeff Vandermeer. So Jeff Vandermeer wrote a lot of books, but his latest Annihilation is coming out this spring with Natalie Portman in it. So he's a science fiction, weird fiction writer. This is basically the blueprint for how to kind of tackle what we're trying to tackle. And I just want to point out his basis for it is your blog. He talks about writing a blog, and he's like, yeah, you got a couple blog posts a week, right? And I can't even fathom the idea of having dreams. 2 to 3 yeah, right. But anyway, but there's a lot of good stuff in this particular book about, because he splits it into private life and public life. Talks a lot about how to be a professional, right, which is a little bit what we were talking about in our Slack channel, as well as like taking care of yourself as a writer and kind of carving out your own little sort of private book life.
I'd like to, there's a couple of little points out of there. Facebook is the one that I use most. I had a look after I spoke to you the other day, Chad, and my Facebook group for my company, That Sounds the Thing, although it's been inactive for a couple of years now, still has 480
wow.
Members on it. And I think if I could pick one thing that I learned from using Facebook, is that you've got to know when you're sending out too much as when you're not sending out enough. Because I heard time and time again from other people like, oh, we're fed up of getting all this information. It's it thumps out from other groups, and it's repeated. And I think it's what Brett said, it's taking things from other people, and it's effectively retweeting them, but in the Facebook terms, it's too much information overload, and eventually people just stop listening.
Well, it's sort of like those email coupons you get, like,
Yeah.
who's, every day, oh, we're having a great sale. Like,
yeah,
I eventually just cancel. Like, I don't care how good your sale is. I'm sick of getting an email at 8 in the morning every day that you have 15% off, soap. I just, it's a little too much. One thing I tried to do to limit the sort of information overload on Twitter is I don't follow a lot of people, which I know is maybe not socially the right etiquette there. I think I have 250 something followers, and I follow 50 odd people, mostly publishers and writers who've worked with, not because I don't care about what everyone else is saying, but I just don't want to have, this huge. Yeah. I mean, I do. I have a second Twitter feed, which I have to make sure I'm not posting to, which I've goofed up a couple times, but that one only has 80 followers. So I know it's not much less well regarded than Sentinel Hill Press is. So, but I just try to keep the volume down there of what's coming in. There's some people never post at all, which isn't a big deal, but there's some sort of high intensity users. You've got to watch out for the sort of the if you're familiar with The Critic, there's some bit where Jay Sherman, the main character, had this like cardboard standout that just kept going, buy my book, buy my book, buy my book. Eventually, I think it gets shot in the head. So I don't want to, turn into that. And there's some creators out there who have sort of a bad reputation for turning every conversation, oh, how's your mom doing? Is she out of the hospital? Yes, and she's helping me with my new game.
Right.
Oh, fantastic. We're going to go ship tonight. Oh, that's been wonderful.
But also one of the dangers of social media is that once you put something out there, you lose an element of control over it.
Yes.
So you can say, I'm just going to send this out once, but you have to understand that there may be a bunch of people out there who think they're being helpful, and they're going to resend it, and they're probably within the same groups as you are. So you can get a bombardment that you've only sent out once, and then people are being bombarded with this thing over and over again if you've kind of got overlapping groups of friends and demographics and things out there. So you have to be aware of that, the impact of what can happen. So I suppose, one of the first fundamental things would be make sure you understand whichever type of social media, whichever platform you choose to use, make sure you understand how it works right from the word go, so you know what could possibly happen given a set of circumstances.
Yeah, Facebook's a good example because it has different privacy settings for posts, and people don't always understand who is looking at what they see, and how possible it is for that to leak out. I generally don't put anything on social media that you want to keep private. Period. There's no way to contain that fire hose forever. So that's definitely important to keep in mind.
Yeah, I try not to, use my social media to, like, say my kid has the cold again. I mean, occasionally it has to come up on the Kickstarter page. I'm like, sorry, I'm not done with this update because my daughter had strep. I don't even use their actual names. I just refer to them like code names, which is something I stole from John Hodgman, who's a pretty good social media user, I think. And it's a similar sort of nerd, not the same genre per se, but at least in a similar track. So I've sort of copped that from him.
Well, I think going back to the idea of like over promoting, like just going back to that circle that I was talking about, where like 9 times out of 10, you're not talking about your project. You're giving something away. You're adding value for free, right? You're saying, you're in a conversation and you're giving your opinion on questions. Like we'll just use the Call of Cthulhu 7th edition Facebook group as an example. People are always coming and asking questions. And I don't know if you know Morgan Hua. He's got a blog, and he does a really good job. I saw him last month, and he's got this blog, and he's figured out like what are the top 5-8 questions that people ask. What's the difference between 7th edition and the previous editions? What's the difference between Call of Cthulhu and Trail of Cthulhu? What's the difference between modern and 19? Like, there's like say a half a dozen questions that FAQ questions. Well, he's written blog posts on all of those, and whenever anyone asks that question, someone has asked that same question once a week. Like out of those top 6 questions, one of those questions gets asked every week, and he's there all the time. And he's like, "Hey, I wrote a blog post about that," and it's not generating a lot of content or a lot of traffic, but it's slowly making him part of the community and giving him credence as an expert, right? Because he's part of that conversation, saying, "Hey, I've had the same conversation," and his blog post is becoming a place where, Google-wise, he's probably getting sufficient hits in our small little niche to say it's probably going to come up in the top searches. And again, I think, just to your point, Ant, about like overstaying your welcome, if you're the guy who's always giving, adding value, but at low cost, high return, then it suddenly is like people are looking around. Well, hey, what do you do? Like, do you do anything else? You're like, oh yeah, by the way, I have this Kickstarter. Like, only when asked, and like just occasionally you're doing it, then it becomes valid. Going back to Jamie Stegmaier, he writes a blog post 5 days a week, right, for like 5 years now, right? He's just got these things, and you can go to his website, and there's just all this free content. So of course you're going to buy whatever his game is, because it's clear he knows what he's talking about.
And also, you have to, once you commit to whatever platform you're using, once you commit to a regular or even an irregular schedule of getting information out there, you have to be prepared to stick with it. Because the public out there will notice if suddenly your information starts to drop off, if your tweets aren't coming out as regularly as they used to, if your posts aren't coming out, and they will draw their own conclusions. They could be perfectly valid reasons for that, but they will draw their own conclusions from it, because we're dealing with people's ideas and expectations.
I think that's a really key point. Sorry, go ahead, John.
Well, just sort of conventional wisdom with social media in general, it applies here, is that you do want a little bit of R&D time in whatever allotment you're giving to social media, so that you can experiment with new stuff and see if it is going to go anywhere for you. I mean, I don't think, none of us talk about Snapchat, and that's a generational thing to some degree. I don't. Does anyone is anyone on Snapchat? No. See, no.
Does anyone know what Snapchat is?
Sure. Well, it used to be something that that was sort of ephemeral, where you would send something and then it would disappear.
Yeah, that's right.
That doesn't happen anymore, so don't use it in that way.
Okay.
Yeah. But this is the going outside the comfort zone. It's quite possible that there are Call of Cthulhu, let me call them buyers at the moment, but people in Call of Cthulhu communities that we're not reaching, if we're not checking out Snapchat. And maybe it's a wash. And also maybe 6 months from now, it's not a wash, because social media is ever evolving. This is not a discussion we can have with about specific platforms without updating every few months, because it changes. I mean, I remember.
Fine.
Yes. Feed the beast. So, and Google Plus is kind of amazing for certain communities. The indie game community, it's much larger. I mean, you just get much larger user numbers, and it doesn't map. I don't think it maps onto who is buying. I mean, the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game community on Google Plus is 2,000 something, maybe 4,000.
Yeah, I think 4.
Yeah, okay. And I've been experimenting with a system called Blades in the Dark, and that group has 14,000.
Wow.
I mean, Call of Cthulhu has been around for 40 years, so it's I don't know. I just went on a tangent that wasn't related to where I started, but there are surprises.
Well, I think, the role-playing game hobby is sort of having a renaissance right now, apparently, I've been told. So it seems to be, sales are up, apparently. My own niche is pretty restrictive, so I can't really gauge. I'm not having, 40,000 copies of anything I've made selling, but because I'm making a niche product of a niche product and a niche corner product. So, but there definitely, as the community grows, it's, the people who have time to game tend to be younger. or retirees apparently.
Right.
But and there's it's I think I definitely don't think we should try to cut our market off and poo-poo something. I mean, I'm probably not going to go on Instagram and post pictures of myself having tea and saying I'm proofreading. But man, who knows? I mean, that's not particularly exciting. I'm not the sort of Instagram-y person, but if someone wants to spend $8 to get a PDF of something I've made, I'm very happy to sell it to them.
Yeah, I do think it's a good idea to just build in a little R&D time in your social media time and contain it, and don't let it eat you up. So say 10% of whatever you were going to do with social media in a week, go check out, I mean, sometimes it's the wrong answer, but maybe who's using Pinterest? Is it possible? I mean, is it possible to turn that into a community? I know that people swap their curations, and it's possible that would work. And if you're first, you could really carve out a kind of a new community.
Yeah, because you never know. You do get the left field kind of things happen sometimes. I managed to get a small group of people who were interested in my salsa business in Texas. Now, this is when I was in the UK. And they became very interested, and even on my website I started getting hits from this place, and then I realized that there was someone actually making salsa with a very similar named business. But those people stuck around, and actually some of them were chatty, and I got to meet a couple of actual salsa dancer guys from the area via that. So left field stuff does happen.
I want to go ahead, please.
I was just going to say, it's just thinking about Snapchat and Instagram, and it really, I guess it comes down to sort of what is the medium good for, right? So I could imagine that artists are probably more in those more visual, designated apps. So.
No, I mean, it makes perfect sense. And I try, even when I do cross-post something between like Twitter and Facebook, or not Twitter, Twitter and Google Plus. The Google Plus group, I usually add a little more content just because I have more than 280 characters. Actually, I've not even updated my app, so I still have 140 characters. But I try to add a little bit more there because I have the space, and I can add, an extra link or two or something else if I have the time. If I don't, if I'm just, putting it out there, I put it out there. But I try to, in what I would post on the Sentinel Hill Press blog is different than what I would put on Twitter, which is different than what I'd post on Yog Sothoth, and all those places are, wherever it could be. One thing I found that I can't do lots and lots of forums. I can't really can't keep up with N-World or what is that other place like RPG.net, or I sort of check in at the Chaosium one just because I sort of feel obliged to, and it's a good. I figure the people who are there probably would buy Call of Cthulhu stuff more likely than, some random group elsewhere. But, it's just those are really time, forums are pretty time intensive. I think the rewards are pretty high, but I'm also, I like longer form responses than 140 characters. So
another bit of conventional wisdom just to throw out there, pretty short, but ask questions.
Yes.
Yeah, it's
or reply to questions, right?
Or reply to questions. Yeah, social media is. I've heard this, that it's relational. It's not transactional. People don't go to social media to shop. They may end up shopping via social media, but they're not going there. They go to Amazon or whatever other digital tool to buy their thing. What they do is go to talk about products or discuss ideas, and they may bump into products that further those ideas. So you have to be part of a conversation in which that's relevant. You've already said that, Dave, as far as that one time that you say, hey, there's a podcast episode about that. Click here.
Yeah, one thing I've had
to interestingly just Googled how many social media platforms are there. God.
Yeah,
and a rough estimate just in the wiki list was 80 to 100 there, just a list of them. So, I mean, what we're talking about is a very broad subject here, and lots of different things. So I suggest we just send Bret out to send something into all of them. You know,
Yeah, that would be great.
Once my children are old enough to take care of it, I will be totally employing them as social media experts. But one thing I've had to get used to is sometimes you ask a question and you tell the audient void, to quote Lovecraft, no one responds. Like, hey, everybody, send me these, and you get nothing. You're
right.
Like, okay, well, that didn't work at all.
Well, it's a good tester of that
Yeah.
medium, or that platform. Are people active? Do they care about this thing I'm asking about? It's kind of a good.
Well, I mean, even, like the recent Patreon dust up, where they tried to change their fee structure. And like, Dennis Detwiller, the Delta Green Patreon, has, I think, 2,000 backers or over 1,000 backers. And he posted an open question, like, what do you think of, the fee changes? And I think he got like 40 or 50 responses. And that's really good. Like that rate, that fraction of the community that's actually directly engaged or willing to post. If I get a comment on a blog post, it was a pleasant surprise. A Twitter reply or two was
a bot.
Yeah,
it was a bot, and it was selling tickets, right?
I'm pretty good at weeding those out mostly. But, it's okay. And sometimes they're a little nebulous. Like, this was really interesting.
Yes.
Right? Before your post, like, you're welcome.
Well, there's a term for it, but and I am not remembering the term, but for that, right? And it's like, if you take 100 people that you're reaching, let's say 100 people read your blog and or read your post, whatever that is, only like 10 of them, like 100 people will read it, and then like 10 of them will like it, and then only one would ask a question, right? Like, out of 100, only 10 would interact, but only one would actually get into a conversation with you, right? So like the percentage of people who are actually engaging with your posts of your total is so small, right? It's like, it's not even 10%, it's like 3% or something like that. Like, it's this really, really small amount of people who are going to go and actually go and respond to your question. And so then it just becomes a numbers game, right? You're just really trying to build out that larger community to get to a place where out of those 5,000 people, you have 50 of them who are going to come and actually reply.
Yeah.
So we just got a few minutes left. Would you mind doing a speed round? We haven't addressed many of the questions that were sent to us, and those half dozen people are the audience. So
yeah, right.
No problem.
I'm just going to throw them out there, and I think some of these have short answers. Is paying for ads on Facebook worth the money to you?
I did it for my Kickstarter, and yes, I got enough of traction. So I spent $70. I think I got at least that much back.
$70 total. Is that right?
Not a lot.
Yeah,
not a lot.
Yeah. Yep. I would say I do it for my job, and the idea is we keep the budget small but a slow trickle, and that helps to build followers that's going outside of your echo chamber, because when you pay for ads, Facebook will push it to people that wouldn't have otherwise seen it. So we just do a little trickle of $5 here and there on posts that we think would get traction.
Because also, I think it can give you a false idea of how well you're doing if you're only within that small community. So it's something that can punch it outside.
Yeah. And to those of you who've run Kickstarters, to what degree do you attribute your success to prep work for social media in advance of launching?
I mean, I've done 2, and they were, I would say, moderately successful for what I was doing. It's hard to say. I think the Dare went a lot better than the Arkham Gazette one, because I'd done it before. I'd sort of stumbled my way through the first one. I was successful, but I have a slightly better estimate of time, and I made sure to have something right up front that people got. I mean, I did that with Arkham Gazette to a degree, but I think that engage people a little bit more. People were very enthusiastic about, you know, the sort of I think I sort of rushed it out the door just so I could sort of fit in the season. Since it was seasonal, I wanted to get it out, you know, run the campaign during October. I wanted to sort of get it out in between, you know, since it's kid themed, there was It and Stranger Things. And I thought those were sort of building off of that. So those sort of, I sort of, was that, I sort of followed the drag of those two other larger media events to sort of attract attention and interest. Plus, I had the advantage of having a name author with Kevin Ross, who's, you know, of Call of Cthulhu authors, pretty well known. So I think those are all to the advantage of. You know, I don't know how much my social media presence. I mean, I posted about it, but I tried not to make every day. We're, you know, $85 away from stretch goal 30.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I think for
that was.
Yeah, I think for me, it was pretty okay. You know, in this amount of social, just to kind of what Brett said, in the social media presence that I have, I think it was important. I got hooked into Chaosium, and they have a solid social media presence. So I think that social media as a tool being used in my success, absolutely. But, you know, piggybacking on other people's much larger imprint, figure out how to do that.
I've never run a Kickstarter, but as someone who has, you know, gone into Kickstarters and taken up projects that I've seen out there, the ones that I've been interested in, even when I was in a point in my life where I didn't have a lot of money, were the ones that I saw a buzz about, the ones even before the Kickstarter was coming out.
Yeah,
I got more information. So yeah, from a end user point of view, it definitely assisted me in making a decision about the things that I was interested in.
I'm absolutely swayed as a consumer by whether or not I have a relationship where I feel like I know the person who is making a thing. I think Chris Spivey's a good example, actually, that I really knew him on social media and through conventions already, and started watching his social media feed and found there were some really interesting discussions about diversity and all kinds of issues that made me go, I need to figure out what he's doing. And when he launched a Kickstarter, I was very enthusiastic about it. So that presence that you can build beforehand, I think, is actually pretty critical from a buyer point of view. Does anybody use any analytical tools? Analytics? Do you use Google Analytics? Do you watch your Facebook Insights, I guess it's called?
I've done it a little bit. I'm not smart enough to, or have a big enough imprint to have it truly matter, but I can tell you when someone from Russia or from Russia is trying to hack my blog.
Yeah.
Because suddenly I have 50 hits from Russia on my blog in a month. So
right. I do use some tools. I'm going to suggest, just to throw out there for sort of efficiency, to use something like Hootsuite, where you can put several social media platforms in one space and they will do some analytics for you. I actually pay for the Pro, but it's because I kind of have to for work. But that gives me great insights in a professional sense. It also covers my butt because I can prove through analytics that I'm doing a job and in my worth. But I think that the same thing applies for DIY social media. And the other thing that I use or have used is Buffer app, which does its own analytics as well. Buffer app's a really great way. Both Hootsuite and Buffer app are ways to write content that you can slow leak out to your followers, so that you don't have to be on all day long. But that slow leak of information and content, value-added content, is how you get people interested. Because of the fire hose, you can't just show up in the morning and do a couple of things and expect that everyone who you want to see it will see it. You kind of have to trickle it out a little bit. So there's good tools for that, and they do analytics. So, well, that is our hour. I think that we've pretty much covered it. Is there any other tools or tips or end notes you want to strike?
I had one
Well,
brief thought.
Sure.
Just when I try to, if I think I have a valuable answer to someone's question on Twitter or post somewhere, I ought, if it's factual, I usually will post it. If I'm just trying to be funny, I write it down and then I wait 5 minutes before I reply, because sometimes it doesn't seem nearly as funny. I think that's kept me from making an ass of myself. Generally pretty well. So hopefully that's working. No, I hope I don't come across as an ass online.
Delay is a good idea, always.
Yeah.
And second pair of eyes if it's really crucial content.
A single pair of eyes would always be good.
Yes.
My only recommendation is to a lot of times end your engagements with a call to action, is what they talk about. And hey, maybe we can end with a call to action here of, we should be coming up with a call to action. Like, what's your social media strategy for 2018? That's the question I have for myself personally. And we're 9 days in and I haven't figured it out yet, but I appreciate you guys helping me. That's what I'm going to be working on. So
I need to reset my Facebook password. It's been 3 years, I think, since I logged into that account. So
who knows?
It's still password. So.
It is definitely not that, but
I guess the one thing I ran my Facebook group actively for probably 15 years. And the one thing is, don't get sucked into believing everything is coming off of that Facebook group. Don't count the likes. Count the likes if you want, but don't take that as as anything other than it's just a bunch of likes.
They're not dollars.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's not the be all and end all. You can get hooked into it. But on the plus side, if it wasn't for social media, I wouldn't have met you, Chad, and I wouldn't be here at this conversation. So
yeah, it's a crucial binder for our community, and
yes,
I've gotten an awful lot out of it. So as much as I want to be an old grump about it, I have gained so much. So.
So my call to action, I'm not going to call it the Facebook anymore.
That's good. Good. Baby steps. All right. Well, thank you so much, guys, for doing this.
Sure.
I hope it will serve as a model for other discussions, social media included, to continue with the WeirdWorks group. So
rock and roll, man.
Take care.
Fantastic.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night, guys.
Good night.
See ya.